Okay, so ever daydreamed about escaping to some sunny beach town, leaving all your troubles behind?
Sounds like the start of a postcard, not a criminal investigation.
Right. But what if that beach town, what if it's on the other side of an international border and you're not just on vacation, you're running from something?
Okay, now that's a story.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. You sent over this blog post about a fugitive caught down in Puerto Penasco, Mexico.
Puerto Penasco, that's,
It's a bit of a haven, at least according to our blogger.
crazy old gringo.
Crazy old gringo. Catchy. So what's this blog all about?
The usual. Daily shit, got your food section, even some science and technology sprinkled in. Really runs the gamut.
And somewhere in there we find international intrigue. Oh yeah, this fugitive story. Sandwiched right between a rant about noisy neighbors and a recipe for fish tacos. Gotta love it.
Sounds like quite the blog. All right, so who is this fugitive and what are they doing in a Mexican beach town?
So the blogger, he calls him Jaime N. 36 years old, American, picked up in Puerto Penasco. Seems like he had some, shall we say, unfinished business back in California.
Unfinished business, like what?
Obstruction of justice, reckless driving charges, that kind of thing.
Huh. Those don't exactly scream international fugitive, do they?
Well, crazy old gringo seems to think it's a pretty big deal. He's pretty fired up about fugitives using Mexico as a hideout. Calls them a pestilence at one point.
Strong words. But he's not wrong. Crossing a border doesn't make you less accountable.
Exactly. And he's also really, praising the Mexican and U.S. authorities working together to catch this guy. Calls it a law enforcement win.
Okay, so a bit of a colorful perspective from our blogger, but this cooperation he's talking about, it is a good thing, right?
Totally. And get this, the blogger says, because Jaime was in Mexico illegally, it actually made the whole thing easier.
Easier how?
So, since Jaime didn't have legal status in Mexico, they were able to deport him right away, didn't even have to go through the whole extradition thing.
Oh, interesting. Now that's a side of things you don't always hear about. Extradition, that's a whole other can of worms, isn't it?
Definitely not as simple as they make it look in the movies, that's for sure.
Not at all. There's a
Huh.
lot more to unpack there.
Yeah, it's crazy old gringo. He makes it sound pretty straightforward, just slip across the border and disappear, like something out of a movie.
Right, trading one life for another. Margaritas on the beach, no more problems, except it's rarely that glamorous, is it?
I mean, I guess not. Living in the shadows, always looking over your shoulder.
Exactly. It's not a vacation. Our blogger, he calls these fugitives a pestilence, but I doubt they're living the dream. There's got to be constant pressure, the fear of getting caught.
Yeah, not to mention the practical stuff, like how do you even get a job or rent a place when you're, well, off the grid?
Exactly. No ID, no credit history, constantly worrying about someone recognizing you. And what about healthcare?
Oh, right. One trip to the doctor could blow your whole cover.
It's a hard way to live, and in the end, most fugitives, they do get caught. It's just a matter of time.
So much for paradise, huh?
Yeah, not exactly the stuff of postcards. And, speaking of crazy old gringo, he actually, he links to a video on his blog. It's called Fugitives That Live Among Us.
Wait, really? Like people we might actually know?
That's the implication, yeah. He doesn't name names in the post, but it definitely makes you think.
A little creepy, right? Like
Uh,
that whole world of international fugitives, it's not as distant as we might think.
exactly. And it kind of brings us back to where we started. Those lines on a map, they might seem solid, but...
But the reality is a lot more blurry.
Exactly.
It's wild, right? We start with a blog post about some guy hiding out in Mexico, and suddenly we're talking about international crime rings and the limits of borders. It's a lot.
It really is. This whole thing with Jamie, it shines a light on a much bigger picture. Like we see this one case, right? One guy. But really, it's just a tiny piece of this whole massive system.
Right. A system most of us probably never think about
Mm.
until, we're the ones trying to make a run for it.
Hopefully not. But seriously, it takes a ton of work to keep everything, well, not exactly in check, but to keep up,
Oh, totally. Because it's not like crime stops at the border, right?
No way. If anything, it gets more complicated. Think about it. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, cybercrime,
Right.
those are global issues.
And they love to exploit any cracks they can find in the system.
Exactly. So you have all these different countries, different legal systems, different ways of doing things, and they all have to work together.
Yeah, because you can't exactly just email the cops in another country and be like, hey, send over your bad guys.
Right. There are treaties, extradition procedures, diplomatic channels, a whole bunch of red tape.
So how does it even work? Do we ever actually get those bad guys?
We do. It's not perfect, but there's a lot of international cooperation going on. We've got joint task forces, information sharing agreements, and technology is a game changer.
Okay, so it's not all, like, impossible odds and shadowy figures disappearing into the night.
No, not at all. There are successes, real people working really hard to make the world a little safer.
Even crazy old gringo in his own way, right? Like that video he made, Fugitives That Live Among Us. It's kind of terrifying, but also kind of gets people thinking.
Exactly. It raises awareness. It reminds people that this stuff can happen anywhere, even in your own backyard,
Mhm.
and that maybe those lines on a map, they're not as solid as we think.
Definitely something to think about. Well, that was quite a deep dive. From a fugitive on a beach in Mexico to, like, the future of international law enforcement. Crazy how these things connect. Makes you wonder what other stories are out there, hidden in plain sight. Thanks for listening.